So the aim of today's little webinar or session is to give you a bit of an overview of how research and resources would fit into your OCA study, should you choose to study with us. So Open College of the Arts is slightly different to a lot of college or university learning environments in that as a distance learning community, we don't have the same ability to deliver in-person library services or resources in the way that you might if you were at another arts college. That means that unlike colleges which may have a sort of college library similar to a school library that you might have gone through in the past, or a public library, all of it is delivered online. This means that the types of resources that we use to underpin our study and our research can look a little bit different. On OU accredited programs, and so that's all your undergraduate degree programs here at OCA, most of that is delivered through the Open University accrediting partner. So what that means is we, as a student, have access to their full offering of digital library services. Now, on the screen, you should see my screen currently, which is the library portal. And so what we're going to do first is just have a look at what that looks like and how it differs slightly from how you might have used even ebooks or digital resources in the past. So the basic function of the library portal is essentially a search tool, much like Google or Yahoo or Bing or whatever your preferred search engine is. And what it does is it acts as a sort of central point of access to all of the OU's collections. Now, as one of the largest HE providers in the UK, the OU's library is incredibly expansive and covers a very, very broad range of different subject areas. This includes thousands and thousands of ebooks, journal articles, and lots of subscriptions to databases, magazines, and other platforms. So what we can find is that when we do an initial search for a basic term, we tend to be met with quite expansive results. So generic terminologies that we might search for come up with quite a long list of results. So a basic search for the words contemporary art comes up with 2.2 million results. So one of the really important things initially when working with digital resources and working at distance is to develop some sort of approaches and skills around searching to ensure that you can make quite a nice high level of fidelity in the way that we search. Now, what this means is that we would often need to look at filtering or changing the way we search. But at a very basic level, when searching our digital resource collections, what you will find at the top is that there is a way to immediately filter down to images, journals, videos, ebooks, or articles. And the first thing we're going to have a little look at is ebooks and what they look like and how we use them in our undergraduate study. So if I were to click the little ebooks symbol just here, what it will do is it will filter out everything else apart from specifically ebooks. Now, ebooks, if you're unfamiliar with them, essentially act as a digital replication of a physical book title. Now, a lot of people may have Kindles or similar e-readers, and that is slightly different to the way that academic ebooks look and work. So by essentially filtering down to just the ebook collections, the first thing we've done is we've reduced from around 2 million results to 30,000. And what that then means is that we have the ability to have a little browse through, a bit like browsing a library shelf or a bookshop, and select a book appropriate to what we want to learn about. So if I wanted to hop into contemporary art, a very short introduction, that then gives me the option to open it within my web browser. This is another reason why when you're starting your OCA studies, one of the early recommendations around the digital capabilities and tech skills is to ensure that you have a laptop or desktop computer to work on, because when working just on a phone or a tablet, it can sometimes be a little bit tricky to navigate some of this, and it can be a lot easier on a laptop. So what we find is that when we open an ebook, there are lots of different platforms and portals that ebooks are delivered through in the OU library. This is where it differs quite a lot from things like Kindles, which have a common sort of marketplace and everything looks the same. So depending on the book, it can look a little bit different in your web browser, but overall, they all have very, very similar features once you're actually within the book record. So by clicking through the book that you want to read, you find a summary of what's within the book. You usually find a contents list, and more often than not, what you can see is there will be an option to essentially read sections or the full book. So in this case, we can see there's view chapter underneath each chapter, which would allow us to open it. Or if we were on a different book platform, it might ask us to read or download the book. Downloading books from the OU library means that you can read them on your local device, and in some cases and some types of e-readers there's the facility to transfer them to those, but it takes particular software packages to open them. This is because when a book is downloaded, you're not just downloading the book itself, but also the sort of ability to borrow it. So it uses something called digital rights management, which is a really fancy librarian way of saying you can only read this book for a little bit. So it downloads the book, but also lets your computer know when you can't access that book anymore. And if you were studying with us and you need a bit of support, getting to the position where you can download books and read offline, that's certainly something that the OCA library would be able to help you with. And we'd be able to help you through getting Adobe Digital Editions and working through that. So the easier way, in my personal opinion, is to read online. What this means is that you can click the Read Online button and it will load the whole book just right there in your browser, which saves a little bit of time. There's no need for downloads or additional programs, and it essentially gives us the option to read the book on our computer. And as I said, ebooks are, in a very general, broad sense, essentially just a completely digital version of each page of the physical book itself. And within it, what we can see is that we can essentially click through each page and read it as we might do a book. Now, one of the advantages of ebooks is that, as well as being able to simply read it from cover to cover, as we might do a little holiday read by the pool in Tenerife, there's also the ability to use some inbuilt tools to bypass having to read things cover to cover. Reading academic text is a little bit different to reading for pleasure, in that often we're not reading the entire book. We're looking for specific concepts. We're looking for extra information about a specific topic that we might be incorporating into an assignment, or we might be just looking to learn more about. And that's where the ebook model can sometimes be even more advantageous than having physical books. Whereas in a physical book, you might need to go to the index and then look to the specific pages. When you're working with an ebook, you'll find inbuilt tools in most of the platforms where you can hop around from chapter to chapter, or even search within the book for specific terms. So this can add a sort of second search stage to any particular research process you're undergoing in the library, where you search to find the book itself, but then you can search within that book to see if it covers a concept that you might want to cover. And what that will then do, if I can remember how to spell, is it will give you a set of results where it shows where within the book a particular concept or keyword is covered. And when you open those results out, it gives a little overview, and you again have that ability to just click and land directly where it's mentioned. So this can save us a lot of time when doing our sort of initial research, because rather than having to read great swaths of text to find out that actually that's not too relevant, we can sort of hop in, get what we need, and get out. What I often say about academic reading is it's unlikely you're ever going to need or want to read a whole book, because you're not likely to find a happy ending at the end of an introduction to contemporary art. But what you can find is a series of useful essays or commentaries that allow us to expand our knowledge, improve our sort of language, both visually and academically. Now, when studying art, obviously, reading text-based resources is an incredibly useful way to improve your understanding of key concepts and themes, and to get a sort of a broader overview of the wider sort of academic knowledge that's going to underpin your study. But as an OCA learner, we're working in practice-based education, which means that a lot of the research and resourcing you'll do through many of your units is more about building and informing your own creative practice. And one of the really useful and important things that we have to underpin and support that is the use of image libraries or databases, which essentially will allow us to visually research other artists, historical artworks, emerging art, to get a stronger and broader understanding of what different art looks like. So one key example of this would be Bridgman Education. This is a very well-known sort of arts database, and it's a subscribed for service that is paid for both through the OU for undergraduate study. So if you're an undergraduate learner, you have access to your OU account, but also if you're studying a foundational short course, as a college ourselves, we do also hold a Bridgman Education subscription. So all of our learners have access to this database. Now, ultimately what this means is that you have access to images of artworks to inform what that might look like and what different art might inform or be incorporated into your own practice. And again, it's essentially a search tool, and it acts almost a little bit like a digital gallery. So you have the ability to explore different artworks and inform your practice. So for distance learners like we are at OCA, we don't always have the luxury of being in a vibrant city centre which has endless art galleries and museums where we can go and visually research art. If you're based incredibly rurally or abroad and you want to sort of inform yourself about different types of art, platforms like Bridgman are brilliant because what they allow us to do is essentially explore art from our armchair. So there's the option to search for specific artists. So if I wanted to have a little look for some work by Frida Kahlo, what I can do is pop that search term in, and it's going to give me a set of results covering Frida Kahlo as a subject or keyword. So what that means is that we have access to this sort of very large database of different artworks, and as we scroll through them, we can see them in more detail. And also there's a download function. So part of the learning experience at OCA, as well as building practice, is about reflective learning logs. And what this means is that we often need to get original artwork images to reflect on and incorporate and consider. And getting high quality copyright compliant images can be difficult. A Google Images search might come up with a few results that are grainy or are difficult to download. Whereas using something like Bridgman, you can guarantee you can get a high quality image that's within fair use for you to use within your work and is correctly attributed. And this is something that is really, really useful to have. As well as that, there is also the option to explore Bridgman as more of a sort of browsing-led experience. So what this means is that you can search through by different subjects. So if I wanted to look at particular art movements, for example, I could come down to subjects, movements period in schools, and I might want to have a look at the movements and say, I'd really love to look at some surrealist art today. And then what it will do is it will give me a set of results that are all themed around that particular movement. So this helps us to improve our understanding of different artists who've worked within that field as well. So many of us might be familiar with some of the big names. And I must admit, whenever I do webinars like this, I always rely on 2 or 3 big names that are my go-to searches. But you might, by doing this, expose yourself to names you've not heard of. And this can act as a sort of nexus point to start building out your understanding of different types of art and movements and artists to better understand the sort of broad nature of who was involved in different periods, movements, or art styles. As well as Bridgman, there are other ones, such as VADS. So VADS is a sort of open access database of British art. So what this means is that it is similar to Bridgman, lots and lots of images that you're free to use and you can explore to incorporate into your own art. So again, it's got the ability to browse or look through collections. And where VADS differs a little bit is that it does have lots of very specific themes. Now, VADS is delivered for free and open access by University of the Creative Arts. And what that means is that anybody can access it. You don't need a subscription. You don't need to pay for it. And this, again, it means it's available to anyone who's learning at OCA or not. If this is something that you yourself would like to access and explore while considering whether to commence OCA study, that itself is also an option to you. And it allows us, again, to sort of build out that visual language and understanding of the art world, and in particular in VADS, British art. Now, as I say, there are lots of different types of resource that we might use while we're undertaking our studies at distance. Ebooks, as we say, are a really brilliant way to improve your sort of broad themes and knowledge, and it's what we call a secondary source, which means that it's not the first time a concept has been presented in the academic world, but rather a summary of lots and lots of key concepts, or a sort of a long form, if you will. And a lot of these tend to be collections of essays in art literature, or they might cover specific sort of technical elements of art. But there's a bit of a lag phase when it comes to publishing. So what you find is that if you are relying entirely on books in your study, then a lot of what you're going to be presented is going to be part of sort of an established pantheon of concepts in art and understanding. And this is because it takes time for recognition. It takes time for a book deal to be offered, to be published. So another really useful resource that we find when studying are platforms and online magazines such as Artforum, Frieze and Tate, etc., because they tend to have a little bit more of a finger on the zeitgeist, because it's a lot quicker to publish a magazine article online than it is to publish a chapter in a book. So platforms like Artforum, it means that even when working at distance, you have access to articles about new exhibitions, about emerging artists, and it gives us the ability to have a little look through that. And there are a whole number of these that are incredibly useful, that allow us, again, wherever we're working, if we're on a beach in Bali, we can still access information about emerging art. So Tate, etc., for example, you might be able to hop in and see an article of interest. And again, much of this, it comes back to the idea of using research and resources to build out our understanding of art from a centered practice that is built entirely around our own personal artwork or the course we're on, to instead incorporate and inform other elements of aesthetics and other art movements or approaches that we might not have considered before. A lot of people find that during their studies within art, they find that their preferred media might shift, their preferred presentation, the incorporation of what they're making and how they're making it. And a lot of that is because while we're studying and we learn more about it, what we find is that our practice shifts within that, and having effective resources and the ability to research in place really empowers us to do that in a much more significant way. So that brings me about to the end of the demonstration part of this session. So what I'll do is I will just leave my screen up, but I'd like to invite anyone who's got any questions or wants to know any more, or even if you have a specific demonstration you'd like recovering, to use the chat function, or if you're comfortable to do so, you're welcome also to unmute and ask directly. The only difference you would find is if you're on a foundation or short course offering, you would not have access to the central OU library, but we have an in-house collection of ebooks available to those learners. And as I say, we have access to Bridgman and other platforms as well. The important thing to remember if you do choose to come and study with OCA is that we're here for you. We want to make it as easy and open as possible for everybody to be able to study arts, and that's kind of our mission. So the OCA library underpins the OU library offering to give you all a point of contact where you can access support with this very confusing sometimes world of using the internet for library research. And all of that is available to all learners. And again, I'll pop the email address specifically for the library in the chat. So if you do have any library adjacent questions while you're considering whether to study with us, what you can also do is you can email me directly and I would be more than happy to answer those questions for you. But yeah, again, thank you all very much. And oh, yes, Gavin. Are we expect to have any experience in art before? Holly is probably better placed to answer that one, but in a very general answer, no. We're an open access arts college, which means we are designed for anybody to come and begin their art practice and study with us. There's no expectation to have a portfolio of work or pre-existing qualifications, and the learning design at OCA is designed specifically to allow you that ability to study. There are some exceptions in that if you are studying music, I believe you have to have, is it grade 3 in music theory or something, Holly?
So it's grade 5 theory. I have just popped a link in the chat as well. If you want to go and check that out, you can find all the entry requirements. But if you go on to, if you're looking at a specific course, if you go onto the specific course page on our website, there will be any specific entry requirements for that course.
If you've not had a chance yet, please do feel free to note down those email addresses from the chat and reach out if you have any other further questions. But we'll go ahead and let everybody leave the meeting now.